What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Virginia Wingard YouTube channel. This is episode 9 of our What is the Bible series. And if you didn't know, my name's Sarah Kate. I'm the Director of Christian Education here at Virginia Wingard UMC. And today we are jumping into episode 9, which is a continuation of episode 8. We're talking about Exodus. So let's get started. In the last episode, episode 8, if you didn't watch it, here's a recap. We talked about Exodus, we talked about Egypt, we talked about pharaohs and what historical pharaoh may have been the pharaoh that was during the time of Moses and the Exodus. So we dug into that last week, and I promised you that I really wanted to look at the plagues. So we're going to take a little bit even further of a deep dive into Exodus because I think it's really interesting to connect the plagues of the Bible with some historical events that actually happened. In fact, there are some scientific facts that can explain the truth of the 10 plagues that happen in Exodus. Now, before I jump into talking and telling you all about the real plagues and the science of the plagues, I want to remind you of what the plagues were. So if you're interested in reading about the plagues of Exodus, and the plagues were these 10 plagues that happened in Exodus starting at chapter 7. They happened when Moses was really trying to get Pharaoh to let my people go. It was the Israelites and God helping the Israelites get out of Egypt. So the first plague was water that turned into blood. The second plague was frogs, a whole bunch of frogs. The third plague was gnats. The fourth plague was flies. The fifth plague was a lot of the livestock died. The sixth plague was boils on people's skin. The seventh plague was hail. And we're into chapter 10 now. This happens throughout several chapters. So in chapter 10, the 8th plague is locusts. The 9th plague is darkness. And the final plague was the death of firstborn children. So just as an update, those are the 10 plagues that happen all throughout through chapter 12 of Exodus. So if you want to catch up on those. But there are actually 3 theories. Well, 2 and a third, 2 plus 1 theories that help to explain the truth and the real validity of these plagues in scientific terms. I think it's important here to note that, yes, I believe that the things that happened in this book are true, but it's also important for us to note what was happening that wasn't written down in this book. You know, when the people were writing this book, they didn't know science the way that we know science now. So it's really interesting to take the science we know now and apply it to this. And that's what we're going to do today with the plagues. So 3 theories. The first theory to explain and prove the plagues really happened is a volcanic eruption theory. There was a volcanic eruption proven on the island of Santorini, which is near Greece, between the years 1620 and 1600 BC, somewhere between there. Ciro Trevisanato, who is a microbiologist, wrote a book called The Plagues of Egypt, Archaeology, History, Science, Looking at the Bible. And he writes in support of the volcanic eruption theory. And this is the super basic version of what the theory is all about. So first, there's a volcanic eruption. After the volcanic eruption happens, winds would have carried the volcanic ash to Egypt, And the volcanic ash, all volcanic ash, has a mineral in it called cinnabar, which is red. And this mineral would have turned the water in the Nile River red. That's the first plague. Then the acidity from cinnabar in the water would have caused the frogs to leave the acidic water, go out on land. That's the second plague. Of course, they were searching for clean water, but this is a literal desert, so they didn't find it, so they would have died. After the frogs died, the insects would have burrowed eggs into the carcasses of these dead frogs and other dead animals trying to survive outside the river, which of course would have generated larvae and plenty of other insects. So that explains the gnats and the flies. Then also the volcanic ash would have affected the weather in the atmosphere, causing acid rain. Acid rain can cause very intense acid rain can cause boils on skin. That's another plague. Then the grass and the plants, of course, would have been contaminated by the acid rain, by the volcanic ash in the atmosphere, causing animal and livestock deaths. Then the humidity from the rain, from the hail, from all the changing weather conditions would have been perfect for locusts to come in. And so that gets us all the way up to plague number 8. The volcanic eruptions also would have explained a darker atmosphere than normal. If a volcano erupts, it's not going to be as bright. So darker periods of time. So that gets us up to the 9th plague. And last but not least, Trevisanito has found results, an account of Egyptian children of aristocrats being dead in the streets. And he believes, in the volcanic ash theory, states that because all these changes were happening and taking place, people were making sacrifices to the gods, Egyptian gods, whatever god you believe in, making those sacrifices in order to help stop whatever was going on in nature. So that explains the death of firstborn children. Well, that's a quick rundown of the volcanic ash theory. Because of this eruption that we know happened at a volcano near this area, pretty much explains almost everything that happened. Now, I want to take a small note here and make sure I'm clear on this. I'm not saying, and because there's scientific evidence that these things really happened, I'm not saying that it negates God's presence for the Israelites. Because everything that I've just mentioned, God controls. God's in control of the earth and the planet and the animals and nature already. So the fact that a volcano could have erupted and did erupt at this time does not negate God's power and impact for the Israelites and the Hebrew people. Let's move on to the second theory. The second theory is called a red algae theory. And this theory kind of came about in the 1990s. It states that red algae could have sucked the oxygen out of Egypt's waterways, which would in turn have killed the fish and turned the water red. And in the volcanic ash, the same thing with the volcanic ash theory happens to the frogs. They come out of the water in search of cleaner water. When they leave the water, of course, they die because they live in a desert. And also the same with the volcanic ash theory. When the frogs leave, they die. Insects either would have burrowed into the frogs, or because more frogs are dead, what do frogs eat? They eat insects. So because more frogs are dead, more insects are around, so that explains those plagues. The red algae states that the gnats and the flies that were in the area that we are calling in English gnats and flies maybe could have been an insect called Culicoides. 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 I've never heard of this insect before in my life. That's why I don't know how to pronounce it. So this is a type of lice which carries two different diseases. These two diseases are possibly the African horse sickness or blue tongue, both of which can kill livestock. So there you go. And the red algae theory then states that the boils would have been caused by glanders, which is an airborne disease spread by flies or tainted meat. And then the darkness is explained by a sandstorm that happened around this time. In the red algae theory, because of the sandstorm, because of the change in atmosphere, because of the algae, the crops may have gotten mold, which of course produced airborne toxins, and those toxins would have affected the lungs of small children more often than someone who has developed lungs. So the explanation of the death of the youngest children is because of toxins in the air and their little baby lungs. The last theory, which at the beginning I know I said was like a half a theory because it really connects on to the red algae theory. It's not a theory in and of itself. It adds an addendum to the red algae theory, and it says that in order for red algae to be present anyway, there has to be slow, sludgy, nasty water. And so that's why this third +1 theory is a climate change theory. So in 2010, there was a lot of research on stalagmites in this area, and they suggested that towards the end of rule, because of this stalagmite research, they found out and suggested that towards the end of the rule of Ramesses II, there was a very intense dry period in this area. It dried up the Nile, parts of the Nile. It created slow, sludgy moving water. And according to a biologist named Stefan Pflugmacher, and he's a biologist that researched these dry conditions in Egypt and talked about how the slow water and the dry air were perfect for the type of bacteria called burgundy blood algae, which that's why this is a red algae theory. It just specifically states the name of the red algae and continues on from there with everything we just talked about with the red algae theory. So I just think it's really interesting that there are multiple events that happen in nature around this time period that can help us read these plagues and say, okay, yes, there is scientific proof that this could have happened exactly the way it's written here, through the power of God. I think the book of Exodus is a really fascinating story, and maybe you can go and brush up on the book of Exodus. It's a fantastic starting point for the story of the Hebrew people and what they go through Exodus, their journey through Exodus, and then the start of the future of the Hebrew people. So we did last video kind of like a behind the scenes. We just did a little bit more behind the scenes. There's even more behind the scenes I would love to do. But for now, we're going to dive into Exodus. And just like I did with Genesis, I want to talk about if you could pick one thing from the book of Exodus, or if I could, what would it be that would be the most important story part, reading part, understanding part of Exodus? Now, there's so much packed into Exodus that happens. You got the 10 Commandments. I mean, the birth of Moses and that whole story. It's so important. The Exodus. But I am going to choose, because I think that this will show up over and over and over again later in this book, is the tabernacle. So if you don't know, when Moses goes up onto the mountain to get the Ten Commandments, God gives him very specific instructions about how they should build a tabernacle, a sanctuary for the people to have with them. And not only do we get this description of the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, and God tells them exactly how to build that. He gives these instructions to Moses. We read the details again about the tabernacle in Exodus chapters 35 through 40. So it's actually repeated. We get double information about this tabernacle. The instructions that God gives and the details showing that the Hebrew people did follow the instructions that God gave them. Elsewhere throughout the Bible, there are a lot of times when things are just repeated over again and you're thinking to yourself, well, didn't we just read this 5 chapters ago? And yes, this repetition is kind of strange, but for the Hebrew people and for the people who are reading this story, the repetition was only an emphasis to show how significant the building of the tabernacle really was. So this tabernacle is the center of Jewish life, and Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5 actually says that the tabernacle is a copy and shadow of heavenly things. It's very important to this group of people. The tabernacle was actually the dwelling place of God. There was a part in the tabernacle called the Holy of Holies, where they believed and knew that God was dwelling in there with them. The importance and the impressiveness, honestly, of this tabernacle, I believe, is because this is a portable tabernacle. This isn't a building or a structure that they built. Remember, when the Hebrew people leave Egypt, they leave Egypt and they travel for a long time, years and years and years and generations. So they couldn't build a structure. They were wandering people. They were living in tents. They didn't build the tabernacle as a place. This tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies, was movable. And they tore it down and set it back up over and over and over again. The Hebrew people left Egypt. They did not have a home. They broke down and reset up the tabernacle just like a big top of the traveling circus, except with the feelings, the solemn feelings of a sanctuary. Can you imagine transporting your sanctuary around with you? And the importance of this is going to change later on in the Bible when Jesus arrives and the curtain in the tabernacle is torn into two, but we're not there yet. For now, we're in a place where the Hebrew people have created a dwelling place for God to show them and to be a reminder for them that no matter where they are, God is with them. A constant reminder, this tabernacle, this break down, build it up again, tent system of fancy gold and outer sanctuary, inner sanctuary, Holy of Holies. There was a golden table and all these very nice detailed things. A constant reminder that God was with them wherever they went. And I would actually love to go into detail about what this tabernacle looked like, the moving tabernacle. So if that's something you're interested in, please let me know, because I think, when I was growing up and we heard about the Ark of the Covenant, we heard about everybody carrying around the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle being set up, I was a little confused about what that might look like. But it is really intriguing, and maybe that's something you can look up on your own. But if you want me to do a deep dive into the tabernacle, please let me know, because I'm willing to do that. It is an important thing here. Just I believe the most important thing in Exodus is to see that God gave the Israelites instructions on how to carry him with them. And they followed those instructions, and they did what he asked. And this is recognizing the effort that they put in, that God's people put in to connect to God and to give glory to him. It's really amazing. It's really amazing. So read up on the tabernacle. Next week, we are diving into Leviticus. So that is going to be interesting. And the whole purpose of this and the whole thing we're doing here in our What is the Bible series is to talk about what are these books? What does this book actually mean? Why are we reading it? Story by story, what should we be getting out of it? So far, I hope you've enjoyed this series. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get more content like this. Make sure to give this video a like, share it on your social media so that we can get more people interested in this amazing story of the Bible. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you guys next week in Leviticus.